Hi, I'm Mitch Carl, and this is Rise or Fall. On this podcast, we will highlight defining moments and the lasting impact they make on our lives. My next guest is one of the most recognizable fantasy sports individuals in the world. He has appeared, pretty much everywhere. He's the winner of many awards, honors, and bestsellers. Simply put, he's a legend. And today, we get to know him on a more intimate level. Beyond the humor, the intelligence, and the superb content, there is a man of great depth and humility. And although he's known for his hot sports takes, today he's here because he's a good human being. Today I welcome ESPN's very own Matthew Berry to the podcast. What's up, my man?
Hey, Mitch, how are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm excited today.
Yeah?
I am. This is really exciting, and it's not just to be speaking with you, but I feel honored that you've taken the time to hop on here and chat and hopefully connect with the listeners, which is what this is truly all about. So, truly I'm immensely grateful that you're contributing to this.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Absolutely. How are you holding up during this time of physical distancing?
You know what? I mean, listen, it is, it's a challenge. I have 5 children of various ages. I have 2 in college, all the way to 2 8-year-old twin girls that are in 2nd grade. So it's, then I have a 15-year-old son who's a freshman in high school. So we're all under one roof. The college kids are home. They're doing online learning. So it's, 5 of us plus my wife and a dog under one roof. So a little bit of stir crazy sometimes. But, listen, we're all healthy. And, I'm still employed, still working for ESPN. And so, in the grand scheme of things, I'm extremely, extremely lucky.
Yeah, I love your perspective on this. I think being inside the same walls day in and day out with the same people can be, a hurdle in and of itself. And it sounds like you're taking the time to value exactly what you have right now, which is family around you, and you're with your loved ones. And I admire that.
Thanks. I mean, listen, there are many people, I can't complain. I really can't, so, I think I'm doing as well as can be expected given everything. And, like I said, in the grand scheme of things, I think I'm truly blessed.
Sure. I like hearing that. And I would assume that your plate is still full. It's still full, even though you might not be doing in-person things. Have you managed to find time to focus on yourself and snag some mental clarity?
Candidly, no. Honestly, it's weird. Normally at this time of the year, and obviously we've got the NFL draft coming up very soon, but normally at this time of the year, meaning the spring, is a very relaxed time for me. It's the kind of the one time a year that I get off. Obviously, August until the end of the NFL season, I'm at the office every day of the week. Then you get a little bit of a break. You've got, and then after the Super Bowl, a couple weeks later, you've got the NFL Combine. Then you've got free agency. And then there's a little bit of, usually there's a lull until the NFL draft, and you get a little bit of time to relax, and you do some research, but it's certainly not a hectic pace. And yet this year, because there are no sports, because of social distancing, so it means 2 things. Number one is that there's even more of a demand for content of any kind. All right. And this was, a very robust and active free agency period in the NFL. So given the fact that there's nothing else to talk about, plus the fact that we saw a lot of big name players change teams this year, perhaps more than we've seen in previous years, there's been more of a demand and interest in talking about that. So I've done I did a column about free agency. I've done a TV show about it. I did 3 different podcasts, and then also, tons of digital videos that I share on social and that also go out on ESPN.com or the ESPN Fantasy app. And so, I've been doing even more content, and that content is challenged because I'm at home where I don't have the setup and the support that I usually do at ESPN. It's been a challenge trying to find a quiet room in my house. I got 5 kids, Yeah. I got a 21-year-old who wants to blare music, and he's playing Fortnite all night. And, I got 8-year-old girls that are making TikToks. And so, I run the gamut. Literally, that is one of the biggest challenges, just literally trying to find a quiet room in my house to do, a podcast such as this one. So, I've been very busy. So producing that content takes longer than it normally does.
Sure.
So there's been more of it, and then it takes longer just because of everything that's going on. But again, like I said, it is all things considered, I consider myself very lucky and blessed. But it is, it's funny because I see these, people online on social saying like, oh, I'm so bored, and I'm sitting and I'm like, oh God, I wish I was bored. People are like, what should I binge? And I'm like, who has time to binge anything? Literally a lot of people have reached out and asked me to do their podcast recently. And so I have, as I like to say, I've committed podultery quite a bit, cheating on the Fantasy Focus, which is my normal podcast that I do at ESPN with Field Yates and Stephania Bell and Mike Clay and the whole Daniel Dopp and the whole cast of characters. And and my wife literally just yelled at me. She's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I got a podcast. She goes, another one?
Oh, no.
So, I literally think yours might be the last one, Mitch. I have one other one that I promised to do, but I have 3 invites waiting in my inbox. I'm going to have to turn them all down because again, finding the time is a challenge these days.
Yeah, no kidding. There's a few things I can relate to in what you were just saying, too, and finding space to be able to do this stuff while you're all stuck together. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and we had just moved into our new house when this all went down, and we're still carving out our spaces, and currently I am inside the closet. So I'm with you. I can relate to not being able to find your own personal space to be able to get done what you need to get done. I also want to say now I feel an immense pressure added onto the pressure I already felt going into this, that your wife is upset with me.
That's okay. She's upset at me. She's not upset at you for asking. She's upset at me for saying yes. And, listen, I'm very flattered. I've been where you are, which is, starting out in the industry. And so I always try to help and give back. There were a number of people that when I was starting out in my career that gave me a chance and were supportive of me. So I try to give back. And so, when somebody asks me to do something, if I can do it, I try very hard to do it. It becomes increasingly difficult, but no, don't worry about that. She just wants me to use my time wisely. So all good.
I appreciate it. You've always done this really exquisite job of tying in life with your fantasy sports soliloquies. And there's this book by JFK called Profiles in Courage, and it defines moments in the lives of different senators, not necessarily just the outcomes, but it discusses the way that these moments contributed to shaping them as individuals. And I would love if you took a moment today to kind of peel back the layers and pinpoint a moment or two that stood out for you.
God, it's a tough one because, it's interesting. I always feel like if you followed my career at all, that you're pretty familiar with my story. I talk about it quite a bit. And to your point, whether it's my podcasts or the columns, I'm always, kind of mining my own life, and sharing pieces of it. So I've been trying to think of what's a story that I haven't told before and what's a moment. Listen, there's a bunch of sort of moments. I don't know that there's one big moment. Starting at the very start of my career, this is one that I haven't really talked about, which is the sporting news. I don't know if you remember this, but the sporting news started back at, I used to read the sporting news all the time, the magazine, which was a great source of stats back in the day before the internet was prevalent, before fantasy was prevalent on the internet. And the sporting news started a website, and they were going to do something called Fantasy Source. Sporting News Fantasy Source, I believe was the name. And they wanted, this would have been 1999. And they had just started, this Fantasy Source, and they were looking for writers. And I was just like, oh my God, that would be so cool. Whoa. And so there was a guy named Matt Pitzer, who was sort of the fantasy analyst of the sporting news. He was sort of, one of their big guys at the time. And I emailed him directly and asked, and he put me in touch with a guy named Mike Narstead, who was running Fantasy Source for sporting news. Really nice guy. And we interviewed and we talked. And I actually ended up, I was actually on a honeymoon to my now ex-wife, which is how I remember the year. And so we were I interviewed from my honeymoon. I was so excited about it. And we were talking about it, and I'm like, he's like, could you write player updates, blah, blah, could you do this? Because I'm like telling him about myself that I'm this hardcore obsessive fantasy player. I'm a professional writer living out in Hollywood. But boy, this sounded like a lot of fun. And then he's just like, okay, and we're going through it, and I'm like, what are you paying? And he's like, we'd pay $35,000 a year. And I was making significantly more than that as a screenwriter in Hollywood, but I was still down to do it. I'm like, okay, like, you know what I mean? Like, I really, because I wanted to do this so bad, I was so into it. I'm like, God, this sounds so much fun, so much more fun than being a movie writer, which sort of was and I was nervous. Like, I'm on my honeymoon with my wife at the time, and like I'm nervous for this interview. And so I have the interview, and we're talking about it, and then we have a follow. He's like, oh, well, let me talk about it. And I sent him a sample or something. And so then we had a follow-up call. And I remember having the conversation with my wife. Like, I know it would be a big adjustment for us, and it would be a lot less money, and maybe I could try to also write movie scripts on the side, but this is my passion. I really want to do it. Like, I was going to do this job, Mitch. And then they called up, and they said, okay, the job is yours, but you have to move to St. Louis, which is where Sporting News was headquartered. And I said, what? I can't move to St. Louis. Can I do this remotely? And they're like, no, we really need you in the office and everything like that. And I couldn't do that because my now wife, had a job in LA, and she had a good job, and she was, we had a life in Los Angeles. And so that was the deal breaker. And I just wasn't going to move to St. Louis. But that was a moment, Mitch, in my life when I realized, sort of when I go through that process, like, it sort of started it as I don't want to say a goof, but as a lark, that I had sent in this email when I saw, like, sort of this notice that they were starting this thing called Fantasy Source. And I'm like, oh, if they're starting something, they probably need writers. And, sending off an email like, hey, do you need help? And like, actually we are. And, this, again, Matt Pitzer, a lovely guy, wrote me back and said, we are actually looking for people, and introduced me to, his boss. And so I had all those conversations. And so the fact that I went that far down the road, and the fact that I was willing to literally, like, take a massive pay cut to go write, like, player blurbs and fantasy advice was sort of really eye-opening to me. And I realized, like, oh, this is something I need to pursue. And so I tried a couple of other things. I tried to there was a website called no longer exists. There's a website called KFFL. And I talked to those guys about trying to join up with them. And that didn't end up working out. And, so I had a couple of the conversations. But one of the conversations that I had was, and I've told this story many times before, which is Rota World at that point then started advertising for writers. And Rota World was advertising for writers, and so I sent the guy that was running Rota World at the time, a guy named Matthew Pouliot, the great Matthew Pouliot. I sent him a note saying, hey, I'm a professional writer living out in Hollywood. Saw you're advertising for writers. Fantasy sports my passion. I love it. Boy, it'd be so much fun if I could just do a column on the side. Do you think I could do a column on the side for you guys? You don't even have to pay me. I just want to do it because it's a passion of mine. Can I send you samples? Can I try out? And Matthew wrote me back the next day, and he said, I looked you up on IMDb. Married with Children is my favorite show of all time.
No kidding.
So because Matthew Pouliot was a huge Married with Children fan, I got a chance to write for Rota World for free in 1999. And so, that story I've told a lot, the Rota World story. What I haven't told, and I may have mentioned it briefly in my book Fantasy Life, but that story, the Sporting News story, and going through the interview on my honeymoon and like being super into it and nervous and being disappointed when I couldn't make it work. I haven't really told that story before. And so that was a big moment for me, Mitch, where I sort of realized I never thought I'd make a career out of it, but where I realized if the whole Sporting News thing hadn't happened, I wouldn't have probably sent the email to Rota World, and who knows how my life turns out. So that was big moment.
What an incredible leap of faith you faced right at the beginning to, faced with the decision to move cities, take less pay, and do something new when you were already, it sounds like you were already pretty established in what you were doing. Your decision to ultimately go from a screenwriter to an analyst, was that based on kind of like the intrinsic value out of what you did, or was it like a passionate decision? I'm trying to find out what was the all-in moment that made you say, you know what, I'm just going to do this.
So there were a couple, right? And so I was doing that along, and again, I go into depth on this in my book. So trying to distill it down to one moment, I think is unfair, sure, right? But there are a couple that sort of stand out to me when you ask me that question. And one, there was three things sort of happened. Three things sort of all happened in and around the same time. Actually, I'm going to say five things. We'll go through those five things. So they were all, I guess, moments if you want. But one of the things that happened is that I got, and I still haven't, to this day, I haven't written about it. And maybe I'll write about it this year. But I've always avoided writing about it. I've hinted at it, but I've never written about it in a significant way. But that my writing partner and I got screwed over in just one of the worst, awful ways. And show business is filled with stories like this of people getting screwed over. But we just got massively, massively screwed over. And it's a long story. But the short version is that there was somebody that was out of work. There was an older guy that was out of work. And he was really, and his agent wasn't helping him. And he was really desolate. And so and he had what's called a spec pilot. He wrote a pilot on spec, meaning just no one had paid it for it. He just wrote it by itself. And he sent it to us, and it wasn't great. And my writing partner and I spent a lot of time with it and helped him because we really felt bad for him and felt sorry for him. And so we rewrote the script and contributed significantly to the script. And then we showed it to our agent, and our agent really liked it, and he left his agent and went to our agency, and became and then the script ended up becoming like this hot script, and there was a bidding war, and the show ended up getting made. It got on TV, and when it came time to hire the writing staff, he screwed us over. He didn't hire us on the writing staff. And and all along, our agents hadn't really pushed us during what's called staffing season. They hadn't really pushed us for other jobs because it'd always been like, oh, you're going on this show. I don't want to name the show. You're going on this show. You're going on this show, obviously, because like we worked on the entire production of the pilot. We were there every day. Like we were sort of this guy's right-hand man. And what ended up happening is that that somebody else, a well-known executive producer writer, was added to the show, and the well-known executive producer writer wanted his own guys. And so when the show got officially picked up to be on television, this guy said, oh, I don't want him. I don't want, Barry and Abrams, which is how we were known, Matthew and Eric, as myself and Eric Abrams. He says, well, I want Barry and Abrams. And our guy, the guy that wrote the script, said, what are you talking about? They've, been with me every step of the way. And the other guy says, well, I heard they were no good. I heard they weren't any good. Whatever, made something up. Sure. Because he wanted his own guys. And our guy, and so whatever, that guy is well known, the bigger guy is well known for sort of being a jerk. But what our guy should have said is like, I don't care what you've heard. I know personally, this show doesn't exist without them. I've worked with them, through this entire process, and I know them because I worked with them on a show previously, and they've helped me out. And like, this show doesn't exist, and they've been here every day, and like, we're hiring them. That's what he should have said. But instead, what he said was like, oh, okay. And then people were like, well, why aren't you guys hiring Barry and Abrams? And it was like, oh, we heard they weren't any good. And so we just, it not only it just basically hurt our career, right? It by doing this good deed, by working for free, by spending 6 months of our life working for free and helping this guy out, it actually hurt our career. Like, we'd have been better off if we did nothing at all, and then we would have been pitched out, because my writing partner and I were pretty good writers. And we had everyone we'd ever worked for before had always hired us again or wanted to hire us again. So we didn't have a bunch of hit shows, so to speak. We wrote on Married with Children, but we didn't have a bunch of, it's not like we got on Friends and then we'd written on Friends for 6 years, right? Every show we were on, just, shows have a short shelf life, generally speaking. It's rare to get on a TV hit. But the point is that the idea that we weren't, quote, any good, every boss that had ever worked with us had tried to hire us again, or in many cases had worked with us again. So, everyone that ever worked with us wanted to work with us again. And then these guys were out there to sort of, cover their own butts, if you will, out there sort of trashing us. And we were like, anyway. And so, it's incredibly scummy. By the way, the show lasted, I think, and I like to think that it's partially because we weren't on the show. The show lasted 6 episodes and wasn't particularly well reviewed. Sounds like they needed us. So, but anyway, so that moment happened, and it was awful. I was just in a massive depression for, a year, probably a year after that. Yeah, I mean, like, it was just such a sucker punch, because at the time the show was like this hot show, and yeah. So it was just,
Yeah, I mean,
just awful. And
go ahead.
Yeah. So that moment happened. There was another moment that happened, and so you sort of stick a flag there, right? We then, from that sort of experience, we ended up getting another show that year, but we were starting to sort of wane out of sitcoms. We did get something sort of at the last minute that year, and so we started doing movies. We started writing movies. My writing partner and I. We started writing movie scripts, and I've talked about this moment before, but we had a meeting with a movie star. We had written a script for Disney, of all places, and we had a meeting with 2 movie stars that were attached to this project. We were doing a rewrite, and so we turned in our rewrite of the movie, and so we had a meeting with these 2 movie stars and their manager, and they were giving us notes on how to be funny.
I feel like you could write those.
Look, especially now that I'm now on sort of the other side of the camera, if you will, I completely understand this on this level, which is that, like, there are certain things that, like, people will write for me, on my TV show or something like that, that I'm just not comfortable doing, that I can sit there and go, like, look, this is funny. I get it on the page, but I just don't know that I want to do that. I just don't know that I'm comfortable doing that. I just don't know that I can make that work, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Like, and I'm usually pretty game to try stuff, but every once in a while I'll be like, I don't know about that. Right. And so when you're performing, you really want to be, comfortable. And so listen, they're the stars of the movie, and they're the ones that are going to have to be on a 50-foot screen and making this joke work or making this moment work. And if they're not comfortable with it for whatever reason, it shouldn't be in there. Like, they're the stars. Like, movies are a star business. And so I understand that. I got no issue with it. What I didn't appreciate was the tone and sort of the attitude of it, right? Which is that, as opposed to just saying, like, hey, I'm not comfortable with this joke, or hey, I don't think I can make this work. Can we try to beat it? Can we try to come up with something different? They were lecturing us on what humor was and what funny is. And I'm like, come on. You know what I mean? Like, listen, you don't think the joke's funny? Fine. Tell me the joke's not funny and I'll give you 10 more. And you don't like those 10, I'll come up with 10 other ones, right? You know, like, I'll keep pitching until you're happy. But don't sit here and explain comedy to me. You know, I've made a career writing comedy at that moment, I think, for 10 years. You know, and the Walt Disney Company was paying me a lot of money to write this script. So, in essence, their bosses, the producer of this movie and the studio that was paying for this, they decided I was funny enough to write this. And my writing partner and I were funny enough. And so it just like this, they were just lecturing me about comedy. And so anyway, so my writing partner and I are driving back from this meeting. You know, we sit there and we take all the notes and we just sort of listen, and, you know, the guy, they pontificate for a couple hours and whatever. And so anyway, we're driving away and I'm just like, oh my God. And I'm bitching, you know, I'm just like, you know, F that guy and screw this and I can't believe it and blah, 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 you know, and I'm just frustrated, you know, frustrated, right? Like, who is he to tell me how, you know, and all this stuff, right? And I just sort of catch myself in the middle of it. And I'm like, wow. And yes, could the message had been delivered better? 100%. You know, like, it definitely could have been couched in a different way. But Mitch, ultimately, you know, I had this moment of clarity for some reason where I just said, look, well, we just left a meeting with two movie stars that want to make the movie we've written. And they're giving us notes on it. Could the notes have been delivered more tactfully? Sure. Less condescendingly? Of course they could have. But at the end of the day, two movie stars just met with us to give us notes on our movie because they want to make it. That's a high-class problem. Like, I don't know how many people that aren't in Hollywood appreciate how hard it is to get a movie made. Like, how hard it is, you know, because there's a zillion great scripts. But you got to find the right director and the right movies, and then you got to find a studio or somebody that wants to pay for it and financing it. It's just like, you know, and it's hard to get a movie made. Man, it is hard to get a movie made. And so here we were, and it's just like, that's a high class problem. And if I was just sitting there bitching about that, like, if this isn't making me happy, then, like, this ain't the gig for me. Man, this isn't the gig for me. And so it was just kind of a moment of clarity. And I mentioned there were 5 things, right? And so, you know, sort of five things. And so one of the other moments there is that the third is that I was going through therapy. And I was going through therapy and I couldn't understand why I was miserable. I was really depressed. And I was saying, like, look, I'm healthy. I'm healthy. I'm happy. I've got friends. I'm married. I got this great job. I'm a Hollywood writer. You know, so many people would kill to be in show business, and, like, why am I miserable? And so I went through therapy, and as we really started to kind of peel back the layers, we realized, well, my wife and I had grown apart, and that, you know, I'm friends with her to this day. She's a lovely woman. I'll never say anything bad about her, but we got together when I was 25 and she was 23. And this is I'm now 35 and she's 33. And I don't know how old you are, Mitch, but I assure the younger listeners here that you were a very different person when you were 25
Oh, absolutely.
When you were 35.
I think you can extend that to when you were a father, too.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And so I didn't become a father till I was later in life, till I was 40. But, you know, the fact is that my wife and I were very different people at 25 and 23 than we were at 35 and 33. And we'd just grown apart. And we used to joke that that if we'd met each other at 35 and 33, like, we wouldn't have even gone out on a date, let alone get married, just because we became such different people as we grew older. So that's my advice, by the way, to the young people, is don't get married before you're 30.
You heard it first from Matthew Berry.
But anyway, yes. And anyway, but I just realized that I hated my career, and that I was trapped in an unhappy marriage. And it took me a long time. It took me like 2 years of therapy to sort of admit that to myself, and that to come up from my subconscious, and to, you know, for me to sort of realize that and embrace it and accept it. But the two moments in show business that really sort of solidified that, where I realized, wow, I really don't like this career, were those two that I just talked about. Was being, we got screwed over a lot of different times by a lot of different people, but that one was by far the worst. That experience, and then the movie rewrite thing,
Sure.
with the movie stars. So those two moments combined, and so there's just a moment where I went to my wife and I said, I was all worried, like I was just like, oh God, I know she's just gonna, fall to her knees crying and grab my leg and no, don't leave me. And so it took me a number of months to get up the courage to sort of bring up the subject of, should we think about splitting up? And when I finally did, when I finally said like, hey, should we, think about, I'm so nervous because I know she's just going to lose it. Right. And I say like, should we think about, I don't know, it feels like things haven't been right for a while. Should we think about, doing something about that? She looks at me and she goes, oh my God, you too? No kidding. And it was the biggest relief off my shoulders of all time. And we just started laughing. And I was just like, yeah. And then we actually had this amazing breakthrough moment where we were both like, we had both been feeling the same things, but we're scared to bring it up to the other. And I think it's one of the reasons why we're friends to this day, which is we were like, it was just like we had this moment where we're like, we should not be married. Like, you've been a lovely person. You've been a lovely person. Like, no one's cheating on each other. There was no third person. There was no drama. We never fought. But we just, we became roommates. We were like friends. We weren't just, and it was, and so we had a very, very, very amicable split up. But, and that was the end of 2005. I'd started at Rota World in 1999. And so, so the fifth thing that happened, there's sort of I told it a little bit out of order. But I'll go back to one of the ones that I missed there. But in essence, basically that moment, 2005 was, when my wife and I agreed to sort of split up at the end of 2005, and I just had this, I just had that, somewhere in there, I'd had that meeting with the two movie stars, and like the year or two prior is when I'd had the thing with the sitcom. And so, and I'd been going through therapy, obviously, those last 2 years. And so those moments, are what I was just like, now I was suddenly free, and I wanted to try to make a career of this. Like, I was sort of free, you know what I mean? Like, all of a sudden now I'm divorced, and I don't have kids, and I have enough money saved up for my movie jobs that I can, listen, I need to be smart about it, but I'm okay for a little bit here, right? That I could pursue this, that I had saved enough money that I could pursue this. I didn't have to worry about providing for anyone other than myself. If I wanted to live on ramen noodles every day, I could do that, right? And I didn't have to go there. Luckily, I was, again, I was blessed in that sense. And so I went for it. I tried to make my website, which at the time, talentsofmrroto.com, a success. And I decided at that moment, at the end of 2005, that, as I realized I didn't want to be in show business anymore, and I realized I didn't want to be married anymore. And so I managed to sort of, I went to my writing partner and I said, listen, man, I want to make a go of this. Like, I think getting divorced, or agreeing to separate, and then ultimately, obviously, getting divorced, but I just suddenly felt free. Like, it's just me now. And I no longer had to worry about, quote, providing for my wife. She had her own good job. She had a good job herself. So it gave me the moment, the impetus to, like, screw it. I'm going to go for this. I want to chase happiness. That was my mantra. Like, I'm like, this is 2005. This is the end of 2005. Like, no one's making real money doing, being an analyst for fake football in 2005, and the people that were, there were few and far between. Like, there were a few people that did it full time. Ron Chandler's, Brandon Funstons of the world, Eric Karabell, Scott Engel. Think about it back in the day, Paul Charchian, Greg Ambrosius, some of the old school guys,
Yep.
Titans, legends, right? People that are friends of mine to this day, and that, that I look up to, and that I used to read when I was just starting out. And so, but like the number of people that made a full-time living at fantasy sports, you could count on two hands. And there weren't at that time, and it wasn't really a career path. It wasn't really it didn't seem like a career path. And I don't think anyone was making, tons of money. And so it was, it was clear that I was going to be taking a pay cut, like that. Even if I could manage to make a full-time living at fantasy sports, I was going to be taking a massive pay cut, from what I earned as a screenwriter in Hollywood. But I didn't care. I wanted to I wanted to chase happiness. And so, so that was that. And so that was, 2005, where I decided, I went to my writing partner then. Now that I was, single and sort of on my own, I went to my writing partner. I said, like, look, let's bank this money, for this script. Let's finish up doing this, last movie. 'Cause I'm going to quit. I gave him sort of a year's notice. We'll do one more project and then I'm out of here, and he did the majority of the work there honestly. And, we did one last project like in 2006. But I was pursuing this full time. And so,
I hate to cut in, but I've been listening, and this is a surreal story, truly. And ironically, it's almost like it could be an episode of a show, of a television series or a movie. I mean, to be helping someone out and doing good for someone, and then being burned by them. I mean, these are things that not a lot of people experience. And when you were talking about the happiness and starting to pursue something just for the intrinsic value, I was just sitting here nodding my head, thankful that you were talking about this, because that's a really tough decision to make, and I applaud you for that. Leaving the comfort of something and doing something proactive about something that's not making you happy is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, again, took a lot of therapy, took a lot of guts. Took a lot for me to get there, but was I felt like I had to. I felt like I was just drowning. Yeah. I haven't thought about that guy in a long time. The guy that screwed me over, awful human being. And I resisted the urge up till now. Like, I thought about like just going scorched earth on him in the book, but I'll write about it one of these days. I'll write that story one of these days.
If you think about it, I think that, if you look back on that time period with that guy, it's one of the catalysts that sent you down this path. And if you think about it that way, sure. I think there's a positive spin on the experience. And even though in the moment it was incredibly frustrating and you felt burned, it ultimately has led to wonderful things in your life. And, the leap of faith you took, I think has ended up also making an impact on a lot of people that you'll never know. If you really think about fantasy football in general, it's something where friends and families come together and connect during the football season to have fun together and have conversations and trash talk via text messages and apps. And, I think the decision you made to leave behind something of comfort to go after something for happiness, ultimately has led you to live a more fulfilling life. At least that's how I perceive it. And, I applaud you for that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And you're absolutely right, Mitch. I'm a big believer in things happen for a reason. And yeah, listen, if that guy, ultimately, if that guy doesn't screw us over, who knows? Maybe the show works. Maybe it doesn't. There's always woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? But you're absolutely right. It was one of the contributing factors that led me to, in essence, hate show business. Then there's parts of it that I really love, and there's people in the industry that I miss and that are still good friends to this day. So, but there was parts, the fact that guy could get away with that, which he did, that guy could get away with it, that, he got paid, he made $1 million. He made $1 million from both between the sale of that pilot script that we helped write and the show and everything like that. He made over $1 million.
Mind-boggling. And
I got nothing. I got nothing from that, and so, that like, anyway, so, it's anyway. But what I was going to say is, like, you're right. Like, if that whole experience hadn't burned me the way it did, I might not have ever have chosen the path and career that I did, and gone into fantasy sports with such, gusto and enthusiasm. And maybe I'm not where I am now, and I'm much happier these days than I ever was in Hollywood. There was two other moments that I'll just sort of mention. A zillion of them, right? As I think about moments at ESPN, I think about things that have happened to me since then. But there's one other one there's two, right? One I've talked about a lot, one I haven't talked about it that much. But the one I've talked about a lot is that that Rota World fired me. That I was in 2003, the end of 2003. They came to me and they said they were trying to cut costs. And I'd been there like 4 years, something like that. And I started in 99. So I'd been there like 4 years, and I was making $50 a column. I was writing 2 columns a week and making $50 a column at that point. I started working for free, worked all my way up to $100 a week for 2 columns. And they came to me and they said, we're trying to, tighten the budget around here. 2003, people weren't making a ton of money on the internet just yet. And, Rota World was running a lot of gambling ads and stuff like that back then. Well before the sale to NBC. And they said to me, hey, Matthew, we need to, we'd like to talk to you about your salary. And I'm like, what's that? And they're like, well, we're trying to tighten things, so we'd like to move you down to $25 a week. And I said, let me get this straight. After 4 years of working here, and they had told me, by the way, previously that my column was the number 1 column on the site, that I got the most clicks and the most reads, and et cetera, et cetera. And, I did some radio for them as well. And so they said I said, so let me get this straight. After 4 years of working here, you want to cut my pay by 300%. And they said, well, when you say it like that, it sounds bad. And I'm like, dude, it is bad. It is bad. Like, again, and like, it's one thing. It's not like there was a worldwide pandemic.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Like there is now. Like, I mean, listen, this was in the news. ESPN came to me and asked me to take a pay cut. This is public. And I said yes. And I was happy to do that because, we're all going through this, right? But so this wasn't that, right? This was just, they were trying to, and I'm just like, I get it. And I don't know, it like saving $75 a week would have made that much of a difference. And I said, like, look, man, like $100 or $25 a week. I was working as a screenwriter then. Like, none of that makes a difference to me in my life. It really doesn't. I mean, like, I said, but it's the principle of the matter. I hadn't done the job for money anyway. It had always been a passion project. But there's a certain, I don't know.
Sure.
It bothered me. But what I said to them was, this is a moment in time. What I said to them was, I said, instead of just, saying, screw you and whatever, hang up and whatever, I just said, all right, let me think about it. Let me think about this this $75 pay cut that you guys want me to take. Let me think about it. And what I did then was, at that time, there were these Yahoo groups. And so you could set up a Yahoo group for free, a fan group on Yahoo for free. And so what I did was I set up a fan group for free. And on that fan group, I posted that year's draft day manifesto for baseball. And so then I went back to Rota World and I said, oh, you know what? I'll take it. That's fine. I'll take the $25 a week. And at that time, you could actually publish your own stories on RotoWorld. Like, you didn't send it into an editor and someone posted it. You just basically posted it yourself. And so what I did is I basically, at the bottom of my column, I wrote, hey guys, if you would like to read my draft day manifesto for free, just go to this Yahoo website. And I put the link in there. And the idea was just to suck as many email addresses out of RotoWorld as I could. Because this is 2003. This is before Twitter, before Facebook, before social media, really, in any significant way. So that was a moment of time. And my plan was to take these email addresses and then be like, hey, I'm going to go write for this website or that website. And I started talking with a couple other websites. And, but I mean, it just sort of exploded. Like, I think, like after 2 weeks, I had 6,000, 7,000, subscribers to this, whatever, which back in 2003 for baseball was, a big number. And there was kind of this de facto message board on it. Like, you could just, and so people started leaving me notes. Hey, Matthew, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And what I did was, and I would try to answer them, but before I could get back, I'd pop in once or twice a day, but the people that were in there would start answering. And they just sort of started to say, like, oh, listen, I'm waiting for Matthew too, but if it was me, I would do this. And people were starting to talk back and forth on this message board. And I was just like, oh, wow. And so seeing, 7,000 people after like 2 weeks, made me realize, like, oh, maybe there's enough here to start my own website instead of going to one of these established websites. And so I did. I started talentedmrroto.com. And I grabbed a couple of friends of mine from Hollywood that I knew were good writers and they were good fantasy players, and asked, do you want to come write for me for free? I'm making no money, but can we, you want to start this with me? And so then, just interestingly, side note, among the people that I discovered on that message board, that first year message board, were Brad Evans. Now, spent many years with me, and then many years after that with Yahoo. And a guy named Pierre Biquet, who now runs all fantasy editorial for ESPN.
This is wild, Matt.
So, and Pierre was the editor-in-chief of talentedmrroto.com, and came with me when we sold the site to ESPN. And so, and we met, a number of other people came through Talented Mr. Roto, like Andy Behrens and Christopher Harris and Nando DeFino and John Cregan and Brian McKiddish, who write for ESPN, and Sean Allen and Victoria Mateus, and just lots and lots of people that been sort of Andy Behrens, I think I mentioned, and so that was sort of the that was a moment too, that just when I sort of realized, oh, I should try to go out on my own. And so eventually, by the way, a couple weeks in, RotoWorld discovered the link and then fired. Oh, no. Well, listen, they were right to fire me. They were absolutely right to they weren't right to try to, just out of the blue, lower my pay, but they were absolutely right to fire me at that point. But then they noticed like all the activity that was happening in my fan group, and then I said, and they're like, well, why don't you come back? And, there's a lot of readers were, not happy that I'd been fired and not knowing the backstory. And so we ended up making a deal where I would come back and I would write for RotoWorld, and I wrote for them for free. I'm like, you guys can even keep the extra $25 a week, just link to my website. And so they helped launch talentedmrroto.com. And listen, the guy that fired me is a guy named Rick Wolf, who is one of my best friends in the industry to this day. And we always joke about that. We talk about, again, things happen for a reason. Literally, the best things that ever happened to me was being fired by RotoWorld. And so, I'm still tremendously fond of RotoWorld and, the people that work there.
It sounds like it propelled you forward with your own site. That's to give you some extra time, some more exposure. That's fantastic.
1,000%. I never would have started my own site. I would have stayed at RotoWorld forever, or gone to somebody else. Like, it wasn't until because I got fired by RotoWorld and I needed a way to tell people, my fans on RotoWorld, where I was going next, was the whole reason I started that Yahoo group, literally just to try to get email addresses, because otherwise I had no other way to contact anyone and say, hey guys, I'm now over here. And because I started that little Yahoo group and it sort of exploded, that gave me the thought, oh, maybe I can go out on my own and do something here. And so, anyway, so that was a big moment in time. And then the last one, and I'll just give you this, and then we can, if you have any reactions, any other questions, I'll answer. But I'll give you one last one that I think is interesting. When I started my own website, my initial plan, this was my genius plan. So I had this website called RotoPass, which is still in existence to this day. And RotoPass is for those unfamiliar, basically I have a bunch of premium websites, and like Football Guys, RotoWire, ESPN Plus, RotoViz, Roster Watch is in there as well. And so I have these really great premium websites. And if you subscribe to all of them separately, it would cost you a lot of money. And I've sort of, similar to like a cable bundle, if you will, I've bundled them all together and I offer them for significantly cheaper than it would cost to subscribe to all of them separately. All right. And so that was RotoPass. And so, basically I take a small cut off the top and then I, distribute the rest to all the other sites. That's how it works out. And so my idea was Talents Mr. Rota was going to be the free site, and I would promote that, and you would come to the free site, and then I would try to upsell you to RotoPass. Right? That was my big business plan. And that talentsmrrota.com was just going to be one big advertisement for RotoPass. And so that was sort of the idea there. And I was trying to, this is back in the day. Again, I started this in 2004. And so again, people aren't really making that much money on the internet yet, or they're starting to, but I didn't know anything. I didn't understand what HTML was. I didn't understand about, SEO or linking or, tags or, any sort of the, tricks that you would use to get, traffic. I had no knowledge of the internet, but I had one friend. Actually, my then wife was friends with the wife of this guy, and so they were a couple friends of ours. This is again, it's 2004, and the guy was one of the founders of Stamps.com. This is what he did for a living, and so I had lunch with him because he was my smart internet friend. And I said to him, his name's Jim, and I said, Jim, tell me some advice on how to make money on the internet, right? Because he was, he's one of the founders of Stamps.com, right? And he's a very smart guy, really good guy. And so we just start talking, and he tells me a few tricks and tips, but ultimately says, well, why don't you get someone to endorse it? I'm like, what do you mean endorse it? He's like, can't you get a pro athlete or somebody? And I'm like, listen, man, I got no budget here. I said, and at this time, in 2004, pro athletes hated fantasy. They thought it was nerdy. They didn't like it. They made fun of it. I'm like, I can't afford any athlete that you've ever heard of. It's going to be somebody obscure. And then even if I could get it, my fans are going to know that it's disingenuous because we know that real athletes hate fantasy.
I'm so glad that's changed, by the way.
So we said, oh, thank God.
Yes,
We've come a long way. So then he says to me, well, who's the guy? And I said, what do you mean, who's the guy? And he goes, I don't know, he's like, I don't understand your world. He says, I don't play fantasy. I don't get it. But there's got to be a guy. Every industry has a guy. He goes, he's like, I don't know, who's the Martha Stewart of fantasy sports? Who's the person that when you think of fantasy sports, you think of that person, that's most associated with fantasy sports? And I'm like, no one, I'm thinking around it. There's people that are prominent in the industry, I'm a big Ron Chandler fan. And, again, at that time, Brandon Funston was writing for Yahoo and Eric Carabo was writing for ESPN. Those guys were well known, but, I didn't feel like there was anyone, with all disrespect to those three guys who were all great. I didn't feel like there was one guy that was universally known or accepted as that's the guy. man or woman, that there wasn't any one person that was identified with fantasy sports the way that, in his example, Martha Stewart is with, home decorating and knickknacks and, hosting the way, Martha is, right? And so I said, no one. I said, it's just, it's a fairly new industry, and just I don't think anyone's really broken through in that way. And so then he said, well, why don't you become that? And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, look, if this thing is as popular as you say it is, if it's going to, and because I've been telling him, I'm telling you, this is really fun. It keeps growing every year. People are really going to, the more people get to know about this, I think it's going to really explode. He goes, if this thing's going to be as popular as you think it is, he goes, eventually there's going to be a guy. He's like, there's always a guy. There's going to be at least one. There's always going to be somebody. He goes, so if you're telling me that there is no one really associated with it right now, you should try to make it you. He goes, you should try to make yourself well known in this industry enough so that you could be your own spokesperson. So that was really, sort of an idea. I was like, oh, and that kind of a light bulb went off. Maybe I could be my own spokesperson. So that was also just a huge moment, Mitch, for me, where I just basically thought oh, interesting. Could I make myself famous enough, quote unquote, famous enough, that I would have enough credibility to promote RotoPass? That was literally the goal. That was that was the idea. That was, hey, I can't afford to pay anyone to promote RotoPass. So maybe I could try to make myself big enough so that I could become the person that, I could promote my own
Build the brand
website,
before
right?
you sell the content.
Yeah, it's exactly, because we started talking. He says, well, tell me, what have you done? And I was like, well, I've been playing since I was 14 years old, since 1984. I've been writing about professionally since 1999. Again, it's 2004 at this point. I've done a bunch of radio as well. I was doing, at that point, I'd been doing weekly hits on Fox Sports Radio. So their national radio chain. I was their official fantasy sports expert of Fox Sports Radio for 2 years. I did that. And, I said, so and I've written for Rota World. And at that point, I think I was doing a blog for MLB.com or, I think maybe NBA.com. I forget. But I'd done, or Sporting News or something. I don't know. I'd done some stuff here and there. And he says, well, it sounds like you have, as much credibility as anyone else in this space. And I said, there's some with probably a little bit more, but yeah, I certainly have, I'm not just coming out of the blue. I've been grinding away for a while. And so I turned Talented Mr. Roto. Again, this was my whole game plan. I turned Talented Mr. Roto into literally a site all about me. Right. And we obviously had a ton of fantasy content, and we had a message board, and we had the whole thing, but literally the focal point of the site was me. And again, the plan was to get you to come see this site about me. And then I was going to be able to upsell you to RotoPass. Again, that was the big plan. And about 3 months in, so that was a very important moment, sort of that lunch with Jim, and sort of that realization that there was perhaps an opportunity there. And it's obviously worked out, beyond my wildest dreams. But I made a very specific choice and effort there from that moment forward to, I'm going to try to make myself into a personality, make myself into a known quantity, and make myself well known enough that, again, that I could sell RotoPasses. That was my sort of plan. And then what happened is that after about 3 months, I quickly realized, again, like I said, Brad Evans and Pierre Biquet and a bunch of other guys, Nana DeFino came on after a while, Chris Harris, Brad Evans, Andy Behrens, all these guys, and other people there were a guy named David Young, who was great, and a lot of people, Guy Lake, Wade Alberti. Anyway, so there were all these writers, and I realized after about 3 or 4 months, I was like, oh man, this site's great. Talented Mr. Roto actually turned into a really good site. And again, like John Cregan and Brian McKiddish and Sean Allen and Victoria Mateus and a woman named Heather Cox. She was amazing. And Ben Ice. Remember Ben Ice back in the day? And I'd have to go through the whole list. Oh, Will Brinson. By the way, I keep forgetting Will Brinson. Will Brinson started with me. Will Brinson, who's now a pure football writer and general columnist for CBS Sports. But Will Brinson started with me. I always forget Will because he's not in fantasy anymore. But yeah, Will Brinson. I gave Will Brinson his first start. And so anyway, it was just a really terrific time, and I then immediately just started focusing on Talents of Mr. Rota. I sort of switched my focus, and again try to make that site, kind of an advertisement for me. And that was kind of a big moment. And I've written about this stuff before, and certainly in much more detail in fantasy life. But that was that lunch with Jim
he
was a
sounds
big
like
moment.
He gave some really wise advice too, and you took it, you ran with it, you executed it flawlessly. And I remember coming across the RotoPass, and I purchased that at a point in time, and actually fell in love with football guys because of your pass and finding out who they were, and it's led me on a different path as well. And you're
great.
I had an interview with Sigmund Bloom a few days ago. He was on the show too, and I've met some really, really interesting people, and a lot of that circles back to Matthew Berry. And you alluded to the fact that when you started, there was no face, there was no who is at the apex of the industry, and you are entirely there right now. And it's really cool to hear about your journey, because it's a long and winding road, and it's full of trials and triumphs. And it makes me wonder where are you hoping your path takes you going forward?
Where do I hope my path takes me going forward? It's a great question. I'll just backtrack and say, well, you know what? I'll tie the two together. I don't know. I continue to find really try to make the most of opportunities and be open to different things. Again, if you've listened to this whole hour that we've been talking so far, hopefully what you've noticed is that at a number of different times in my life, an opportunity presented itself and I pivoted. I had a plan for one thing and I did something else. Roto World fires me and I start this thing. I have this idea that I think RotoPass is going to be this big moneymaker. And then I realize there's an opportunity here to turn myself into more of a personality and show that side of myself more, and to also and to promote fantasy football in a big way and promote fantasy sports and make Talents of Mr. Rota the focal point, not RotoPass. And I did that. And so, when there's things that I hadn't planned on, right, and so whatever, I have that lunch and, I'm given this, sort of brilliant idea, and I realize, hey, there's a moment in time. And so trying to focus on that and do that. I mean, I don't know. I enjoyed, I loved doing, for all the obvious reasons, but I also just the process of it. I enjoyed doing my little cameo in Avengers, and I've done, other little acting things as well. And so I've enjoyed that. I've enjoyed going back to Hollywood. They made a pilot out of my book, Fantasy Life, and the show ended up not getting picked up, but I enjoyed that process. So, are there more opportunities to sort of dip my toe back into Hollywood? Sports gambling obviously is becoming more and more prevalent in the States. And so I'm looking at opportunities there as well. I never want to leave my base of fantasy. I'm a fantasy guy through and through. I always have been, always will be. That's my love. But I like gambling. I enjoy it. And so looking at, what are there ways that I can participate in that, that makes sense for me and what I've done. And so, and listen, I'm trying to figure out, how the best way to be a, good husband and father to my 5 kids. So, that's what the future
Those are
holds.
great things to tackle, and those are always monumental tasks for everybody. Just constantly trying to not be complacent in who we are. And, your path is that was a great story. And I'm so thankful that you shared your story with us and for connecting with the listeners, because, we don't hear enough stories about perseverance. And yours was about perseverance in the pursuit of happiness and capitalizing on opportunities and ultimately just believing in yourself. And I have no doubt in my mind that this will make an impact on some listeners. And even if it's just a few, then it was worth our time today. And I'm very grateful for that, Matt.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for asking and thanks for listening.
Absolutely. You can find Matthew Berry on Twitter at MatthewBerryTMR. Please hit that subscribe button and tune into our next episode to hear more defining moments in Rise or Fall.